Hello, welcome to our session on California Indian Education for All and tools for undoing false narratives and assumptions in Indian education and curricular reform. I'm here today from the California Indian Museum and Cultural Center. I'm the director. My name is Nicole Lim, and I am Pomo. We have 24 Pomo tribes in our region: Sonoma County, Mendocino and Lake counties, Northern California. And I have been working on improving the classroom, the climate of the classroom for Native students for many years. At the museum, we're dedicated to providing resources to teachers and making sure that California Indian voices and perspectives are integrated into curriculum. I'm also here with Dr. Jolie Proudfit, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Miriam, Natong Dr. Jolie Proudfit. Hello, everybody. My name is Jolie Proudfit. I am the director of the California Indian Culture and Sovereignty Center at California State University, San Marcos, and I'm also a board member with the California Indian Education for All nonprofit, and I'm also a board member, and I have been for more than 2 decades, with the California Indian Museum and Cultural Center. So our 3 collective groups have been working to bring you some tools to erase some of those false narratives and assumptions about American Indians in order to better impact California education for all of California students, especially our Native youth. And so Nikki and I have been working together for more than 2 decades to change their curriculum, change the narrative, remove those assumptions, and we're pleased to be with you today to help do that. I'm also Payamkawisham Luceño, a descendant of the Pechanga Band of Luceño Indians, and I'm a 3-time CSU tenured professor. I'm a political scientist by training, and I also chair the American Indian Studies Department.
So we'd like to review some different ideas and concepts and tools and resources that are currently available to educators on the topic of curricular and education reform. In terms of why we focus on education, there's many reasons, primarily because we're parents of California Indian students, and we experience firsthand the issues that they bring home. And it's really important, I think, especially when we're talking about California Indian history, that it's not just seen as Native history. It's really all of California's history, and every student in California has a right to know accurate information about that history. And so we really believe and are committed to the idea that it protects the well-being of the students in the classroom, Native and non-Native students alike. We're very committed to improving understanding of culture of American Indian people, making sure that people speak to our history and culture in an intelligent way. We often say, we get asked to do cultural sensitivity training, and Jolie always reminds us that it's not about being sensitive to our culture, it's speaking intelligently to it and about it. And making sure that there's opportunities for partnership. There's so many tribes in California, and we can focus on the different regions that we're located in, but making sure that there's meaningful opportunity for those tribal educators to come into the classroom and communicate with your students. We know that there's a lot of engagement around the idea of diversity and whether or not American Indians are included and how they're included and how they're defined are issues that really need to be addressed if diversity can be achieved through that. And we want good citizens, right? We want global citizens that care, citizens that are engaged, and citizens that help each other. And that comes with having truth and authenticity in terms of education.
And if I can add, it's not only what we teach, how we teach, but it's also how we respond to what's around us and what's in the classroom and what students are saying with the limited experience and knowledge they have. So you as a teacher have the power to really not only educate, but to create a safe space and environment. Just yesterday, my daughter came home from school and they were reading short stories about Native Americans, and she's in the Encinitas School District and she's in the 4th grade. So this is that time of the year when they're learning about American Indians. And after they read the story and talked about the contributions of feathers to the regalia of Native peoples, one of the little boys in class said, "I'm glad I'm not a Native American. I wouldn't wear feathers." Now he's, a 9-year-old boy, but it was how the teacher responded that impacted her most. And it was how quickly the teacher responded. So, this is also an opportunity for you to, even with your limited information and knowledge, is how do you respond when things like this are said and addressed?
One tool that we use quite often, and I think that this tool goes well to kind of frame the issues, is the idea of education and genocide. And this gives you kind of a visual look at the history of genocide and how it impacts people all over the globe. And when we take this structure and apply it to the experience of California Indians, it becomes really clear that we went through classification, symbolization, dehumanization, organization, polarization, all these things in terms of how our people were impacted and how those things continue today, classifying us, dehumanizing us. Do we still have places that are named after the term squaw, right? Men being referred to as bugs, people being put in reservations and boarding schools, and the war of extermination that was waged by the first governor of California. All of these things occurred in our history, and some of these things continue today. And I think that stage 8 is something that we're still stuck in. And I believe this because when we don't tell the truth about what occurred, when we blame the victims, when we deny that it happened, that is the stage 8 of denial. And that continues because in California, we require the 2 major genocides to be taught in the 4th grade. And having them taught in the 4th grade doesn't allow us to have an accurate representation of what occurred, because teachers and families are uncomfortable telling these atrocities to 8 and 9-year-old children. And so we really have to look at this context and realize that we're still stuck in it.
Right. And I think we could also say that between stage 8 and stage 9 is this notion of erasure. The erasing of California Indians. You know what? I'm not going to deal with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. It's too hard. I haven't been trained to do this. I wasn't taught this in my teacher prep program, so I'm just going to erase it like it never happened. So it's a form of denial, but it's even more insidious because we just act like it just didn't happen and the people don't exist. And so we discuss everyone else and every other issue. We can even discuss global atrocities, but we'll exclude California Indians and the discussion of California Indian lands and peoples and places and spaces that are still being lost and challenged and neglected today. So erasure is also real. Don't think you're going to get out of this by just not addressing it, or you're so uncomfortable or you feel inept to address it that you erase it, because that is also a stage that is permeating and impacting our students. And, unfortunately, Native peoples today, we get excited when we hear our name mentioned or mentioned by, it could be, in a political campaign. And unfortunately, it's usually mentioned in a very negative way. Not that they're trying to be negative, but they're addressing, could be missing and murdered Indigenous women. It could be the lack of resources, clean water. But the fact that we're mentioned in our eyes humanizes us. So the notion of erasure is real, and let's not do that.
So often what occurs in the classroom is a show and tell, a mocking of Native people and culture. And, you know, usually this are done in the way of assignments. And, you know, and unfortunately, I see a lot of project-based assignments, which manipulate and appropriate Native culture. And so it's very difficult, you know, to be a California Indian child in a classroom where you're instructed to, for everyone in the class to engage in this type of behavior. It's very damaging to our children.
And imagine being a California Indian child and the teacher does bring in Native American culture, but completely skips over California Indian culture. That erasure is painfully real. Or a teacher who's really loves to do the gold rush assignment and loves to have her students pan for gold. And if you're a California Indian and you know your history, which most of our children do to a certain extent, having a teacher celebrate joyfully, gleefully, what was almost an entire extermination of our peoples does not sit well with our children. So be conscientious about what it is that you're teaching and how you're teaching it.
So one of the tools that I think is really meaningful is the culturally sustaining pedagogy and making sure that we embrace that in the classroom and in curriculum. And the key factor here is understanding that our cultures are not in the past. They're not static. They're changing and evolving. They're dynamic. And understanding that the students in the classroom are living those cultures and defining those cultures and how they move forward in the future. And so when we teach with a culturally sustaining pedagogy, we're acknowledging that the students are part of that culture and defining its future. Examining historical bias is a skill that has to be developed over time. But definitely looking and evaluating the tools that you're using in the classroom and really seeing what purpose do they serve. And, you know, there's a lot of issues with textbooks, mainly that they're not engaging Native people in writing them. And when we look at the history of textbooks and look at how, you know, what purpose do they serve, they're really looking at inspiring patriotism, telling the truth optimistically, and not dwelling on, you know, negativity of the past. And so when we're looking at how we examine it, I think we really have to be critical of whose point of view is being presented. What was the purpose this was written for? And when we start down that road, we realize that a lot of the primary sources, right, come from colonialists, right? People who had a purpose behind defining Native people as savage or inferior, defining our landscape as a vacant place, right? Vacant land, untamed wilderness, because those all serve the purposes and the legal structure behind colonization and the doctrine of discovery. And so until we actually get input from Native people directly, there's always going to be bias in the tools and resources that we have. So it's really important that we engage oral history. And, you know, I think we're at an advantage these days because I know when I was going to school, we didn't have YouTube. We didn't have direct access to Native people telling their stories. And so there's a lot of ways that technology can support the change that needs to occur. We've also created the 7 essential understandings that we adapted from Montana's 7 essential understandings, and we've adapted them specifically to California. And later when we review the website, you'll see that we've created tools, videos, and lots of resources on all of these 7 essentials. But I think that the 7 essentials serve the purpose of really creating a digestible framework for some of the foundations that educators need to have in order to effectively teach about California Indian history and culture. The first one is really about understanding the diversity. You know, do you know how many tribes are in California? Do you know why we have federally recognized and federally unrecognized tribes? And the answer to that question is there's about 200 tribes in California, and about half of them are federally recognized and the other half are not. And that is really based on a colonial definition that didn't foresee that tribes would be around in 2020. You know, so when we're trying to achieve diversity and, you know, decolonize things, we really have to look at the definitions and grounding and kind of false narrative that we base these labels upon. Also understanding that there's diversity among American Indian identities. You know, so many times I've heard kids say, well, I don't feel Indian enough. And you say, Indian enough for who? And it's because they're constantly challenged about their Indian identity. Oh, you're an Indian? Oh, are you from a reservation? You know, people say, do you live in a teepee? Or how much are you? All of these things really are false assumptions and judgments about who we are. And that's not recognizing that culturally sustaining pedagogy where we define who we are as we move to the future. And so there's many different kind of spectrums of Indian identity, and understanding all those different classifications is really important. Native traditional beliefs persist into modern day. That's something that's very critical. We often see, you know, textbooks open with, you know, reiterating the Bering Strait theory, right? And the Bering Strait theory is contrary to most, if not all, indigenous religious and cosmology beliefs. And so understanding that our traditional belief systems are in place in our practice, despite having been under assault and attack and subject to erasure, we're still here. And these, you know, these tools that are being used in the classroom are often contrary to that and don't respect it. Number 4 is understanding that there's federal, state, and international policies that have affected and continue to affect our tribes, and understanding, you know, things like the war of extermination or the efforts to assimilate Native American people throughout the 19th century, and understanding how those impacted our communities and continue to impact them. Number 5 is about reservations and understanding land. Very critical in California. If you're going to have an understanding of California history and contemporary issues, understanding our loss of land is key. You know, we would have had 7.5 million acres had treaties been ratified, but they were not. And so today we have very small land bases, and, you know, a lot of people and land, but not large land, not lands where communities can flourish economically, not lands where you could sustain a language and revitalize a language. Those all become challenges. Lands where we can do our traditional foods, our gathering, our harvesting, environmental stewardship. All of these things are really critical. And then understanding also that history from a California Indian perspective is much different and opposite to what other people know and present about us. There is a lot to be said for California Indians owning our own story. And I say that because there's so many people in academia, specifically historians, anthropologists, archaeologists, who try to usurp our authority over our own narrative and story. And that is very difficult when it comes to how we interpret our culture, how we interpret the baskets that aren't in our collections because somebody else has sought ownership and expertise. So these things are ongoing. And then number 7 is really having an understanding of tribal sovereignty. And, it's very interesting because a lot of the curriculum looks around, well, how do tribes engage with their, federal and state counterparts? Well, if you don't have a solid understanding of tribal sovereignty, it's really hard to understand how that actually occurs. And so, you could spend a long time looking at the definition of tribal sovereignty, but we have the tools and resources to summarize some of those things so that you can understand them better. So we'd like to take a look at the California Indian Education for All website. It was created as a clearinghouse of resources, and it's got some really great tools on there. So I will pull that up and let Jolie talk about the website.
The California Indian Education for All website was developed for Indian people, by Indian people, but with the intent that all educators, parents, administrators, students could use this website and the tools that it brings. So we'll go to the About page. Here you see our mission. Our mission is to help teachers and schools educate children and youth about the diverse histories, cultures, and contributions of California Native peoples. So right there, our mission is coming at this from a proactive, positive perspective. And our goal is to create culturally responsive resources that have been vetted by California Indian scholars, cultural experts, classroom teachers to improve representations in classroom climates for teaching and learning about California's First Peoples. So this is a one-stop shop for teachers to come and gather resources, some knowledge, some tools, so that they can implement those that they're classroom ready. And the 7 essential understandings, which we just went over, you'll see that we have a page dedicated to each one of those 7 essential understandings with resources, videos, really wonderful ways in which you can bring those into your classroom at all grade levels. So you can adapt them to the themes and the core competencies that you're working on. But the 7 essentials that Nikki just ran through, you have a nice learning module of each of those, as well as some videos that further explain those. Then we have what I think most people are interested in is the classroom resources. So these are approved classroom resources because not everything you find on the internet is something worth bringing into your classroom. These are. So there's an Indigenous Peoples Day toolkit. We have some board resolutions that have been done for Indigenous Peoples Day in San Diego County that can be adapted by other areas and other school districts. Of course, you have the California Museum and Cultural Center education resources. One of our board members is a part of the Teach Rock. He's executive director of the Teach Rock Foundation that has the wonderful rock and roll lesson plan focused on the film Rumble, how American Indians influenced rock and roll. It's a great resource. So there are a number of resources, approved books that you can look at. And then we also have some native food areas and lesson plans that go with native foods. And who doesn't love to talk about foods? And foods can be really place-based. So while some of these focus on Central and Northern California, you can develop them and adapt them to learning about native foods and plants in your own area. So I encourage you to peruse those. And then again, of course, another hot teaching item is Thanksgiving. What is the true story of Thanksgiving? So here's a number of different resources that you can look at. And then California missions. We're working on some curriculum that will bring the California mission story to the classroom in a way that better addresses the California Indian experience. And we have a land acknowledgement toolkit. I know many of the schools districts are now trying to bring that into place. So take a look at that. We have we have an upcoming curriculum that we're working on California Gold Rush. And I know that is a priority for our schools. So you want to check back frequently. We have some native STEM assignments and some culturally responsive teaching resources. So take a look at those. So it's a one-stop shop for many of these resources. And if you need further clarity or information, please don't hesitate to reach out. Then we have professional development, like we're doing today. Professional development, there's been many opportunities. Nikki has done a number of webinars over the last fall semester, or I would say fall season. And these will be made available through the California Museum and Cultural Center website. And I'm sure we'll link to those from here, those that have already been done. But check back here. We're constantly updating and doing professional development. And we have a training calendar. And we also this summer did a survey of all of the state's American Indian students in K through 12. And here's a synopsis of the survey results of how COVID is affecting our students' learning abilities. And I think we also have a nice pie chart that kind of defines those. But we'll be doing additional survey and research studies to look at California Indian and Native American students who reside in California and how we can better support parents and families impacted not only by COVID, but by other issues, you know, that are challenging our students. So take a look at that. And then we, of course, have a subscribe button and a contact us. So if we can be of assistance to you, please, you know, reach out. But we are, you know, we are here to partner, to support. And this California Education for All is an initiative and a partnership between the museum, the California Culture and Sovereignty Center, the San Diego County of Education, and and tribal nations to better support the needs of the state's first citizens and first peoples, and to help our teachers meet the demands and needs of their students.
If COVID-19 has shown us anything, is that we have serious educational inequities and disparities, as has been the case highlighted by our survey this summer. And so we want to challenge teachers, school districts, educators to really consider what they can do to support our Native American students in and outside of the classroom. You know, I have a 9-year-old daughter, and it's been very challenging to homeschool and even to have pods and hybrids, but most families don't have the resources or the capability. So I really want to encourage schools to really consider the health and wellness of our Native students, our Native families, our Native communities, and find ways to work together to make sure that we fulfill our mission to meet the needs of all of our students and not wait for outside entities to actually do the work. We are the close contact to our students. So how can we better serve our students? How can we help you better serve your students, or connect the dots to other agencies, tribes, partners, after-school programs to meet those gaping holes that COVID-19 has so exposed that our students and communities are facing?
Here at the museum, we've been really focusing on getting as much of our cultural community, our STEM maker stations, our field trips online as much as possible, so that we can engage people in the museum, even though the museum is closed and they can't come here in person. Some of the issues that we've seen, especially within our own tribal community, is, and also we're also we just concluded another fire season. So we've been really focused on the mental health and well-being of our community members and our students who have really, you know, already having historical trauma, but then having anxiety on top of, you know, the pandemic and the fires have really caused a lot of stress. And so we've been trying to focus on programming that reduces that stress. And one of the things that really helps is creating community and connectivity through cultural programming. So we have online classes around beading, around basket weaving, around doll making, that really creates an opportunity for us to come together, although it's virtually, and be a community together. Another thing that we're focused on too, that we're currently doing a project with the National Center for Health, is around how we engage kids in activity, physical activity during the pandemic. And I know that this is a challenge. I'm the mother of a high school freshman and a college sophomore. And, you know, they spend long hours online doing their schoolwork, and they're stuck in front of a computer, and it's not the best for their physical health or their mental health. And so engaging kids in movement, there's a great site called Well for Culture that talks about the 7 circles of wellness and how important it is to have, you know, kids connected to their ancestral landscapes and going out and being, you know, in nature and doing physical exercise. I think it's really critically important during this pandemic. So making sure that self-care is a key, and that we're encouraging and engaging our students in caring for themselves, so we can care for each other. And so I think that this concludes our time, but we would like to say that we are available, and so both of our contact information is listed here. And don't hesitate to reach out and let us know if you have questions, if you want to be directed to resources, or anything that we can do to help you and your students and your classroom. Thank you.
Thank you.